Have you ever looked back on your life and thought, how did no one realize that I was AuDHD? It is so obvious in hindsight, right? But instead, they just thought you were being too sensitive or maybe a little anxious and overwhelmed. And I get it. None of those things seemed unusual on their own. But when you put them together, they weren't just quirks, they were signs of AuDHD. You just didn't recognize them yet. So today we'll talk about signs of AuDHD in women that are often brushed off or misunderstood. The first one I'll speak to is perfectionism. Have you ever been told you are such a perfectionist? Maybe it felt like a compliment at the time. You got recognized for being detail-oriented, for going the extra mile, and for doing things just right. But perfectionism in AuDHD usually isn't about pride or ambition. From the autistic side, it comes from a need for structure and consistency. Mistakes can feel confusing or even distressing, like you've messed something up and you don't know how to recover from it. From the ADHD side, it's often a way to overcompensate for missed deadlines or struggles with focus. If your attention is inconsistent, then doing it perfectly next time feels like the only way to prove that you are capable. So what looked like motivation on the outside was actually anxiety, shame, and the fear of judgment. And because no one connected that to autism or ADHD, it just looked like a personality trait. Now moving on, what about all those times when you were told you are too emotional, you always overreact, and you know what, you need to toughen up? What if your reactions weren't too much? What if you were just misunderstood? When you live with AuDHD, emotional reactions often come from a mix of sensory overload, emotional dysregulation, and feeling like you're constantly being misread. And unfortunately, in women, these reactions often get labeled as being dramatic or having mood swings. Your autistic side might cry during a tense conversation or shut down when someone raises their voice or panic in a loud, overstimulating room. And with ADHD layered in, your nervous system is already overstimulated. You're reacting impulsively, sometimes before you even know what you're feeling. Unfortunately, people don't recognize that you're dysregulated. They just think that you're being too sensitive. So instead of getting support, you got blamed. Now let's talk about socializing. You might have had friends, you were talkative enough that no one thought twice. Maybe you even came across as confident or outgoing. But underneath all of that, you were constantly analyzing, rehearsing, and adjusting. From autism, you had to learn social rules manually by memorizing what to say, copying other people's tone or body language, and learning through trial and error. From ADHD, you were impulsive, jumped around a lot in conversation, and felt emotions that moved faster than the group could follow. The result is that you didn't exactly blend in, but people saw enthusiasm, not struggle. No one saw autism or ADHD, so instead of getting support, you were seen as someone who was just a little too much, a social chameleon trying to keep up, but never truly feeling at ease. You weren't thriving in social settings, you were over-functioning, trying to manage every interaction so that you wouldn't be rejected. And even when people did sense something was different, they chalked it up to shyness or just that you were a little bit quirky. So now let's talk about burnout. You kept yourself together, trying to be exactly what everyone expected you to be. You pushed through until suddenly you couldn't. You froze, you withdrew, you stopped responding. People thought you were unreliable, but what they didn't see was the effort it took just to appear functional. Masking is exhausting. Hyperfocus burns you out. And when you're constantly forcing yourself to operate on everyone else's terms, you crash. This isn't regular burnout. It's what happens when your brain has been pushing too hard, too long, without a break. And it is incredibly common in women with AuDHD. Now let's get into the signs that weren't as obvious, the ones even you might have missed. Let's start with guilt. Perhaps you always feel like you're running behind, like you're letting other people down, like you should be doing more. From ADHD, there's time blindness, forgetfulness, and executive dysfunction. From autism, you crave structure but can't always sustain it. So You blame yourself. You apologize constantly. You assume your needs are inconvenient and you feel like a burden to others. That kind of guilt becomes chronic, and eventually it doesn't even feel like guilt anymore. It just feels like you are a fundamentally flawed person, but you are not. It's just your AuDHD at work. Another sign that hides in plain sight is mental overload and shutdown. You have an idea or desire, you know the steps, but when it's time to act, your body refuses and you don't know why. This is what it feels like when ADHD urgency collides with autistic inertia. There's too much to do, too many decisions, and the more pressure you feel, the harder it is to start. You pause, you freeze, and before you know it, you're spiraling. From the outside, it looks like avoidance. Inside, it feels like mental quicksand with every action pulling you further away from your goal. You're not lazy, you're stuck in mental gridlock. Now let's talk about inconsistent social behavior. You crave connection, but it's hard to maintain. You might overshare one day, then go silent for a week. You cancel plans last minute. You ghost people, even the ones you love. Sometimes you are so afraid of saying the wrong thing that you might not say anything at all. And sometimes when you finally speak, it turns into a story about yourself, not because you're self-centered, but because that's how you try to connect to others. You weren't a bad friend. You just communicated in a way people didn't always understand, using a brain that manages relationships differently. So why didn't anyone figure this out? Well, because you didn't look like the stereotype. People thought you were just shy or sensitive or anxious. And because you didn't look autistic and didn't act like an ADHDer, you didn't even consider that you could be AuDHD. So your sensory overload got called anxiety, your executive dysfunction got labeled as laziness, and your communication style, well, you were just too much. So instead of being supported, you were dismissed. No one knew what to look for, but now you can see it. You can go back and reframe your story. You can finally name the behaviors you were told were flaws and stop blaming yourself for what was never your fault. And now that you understand what was really going on, you can finally see that you were AuDHD all along. Let me know in the comments one way that you experience AuDHD, and if there's someone in your life who still doesn't get it, send them this video, because when the signs are finally seen, everything starts to make sense. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you next time.